Sometimes the choices that shape our lives are made by others, and we must live with the consequences, whether we like them or not. For Asgrim Hardborn, that choice came wrapped in a father's dying oath and a bride's mysterious veil. Asgrim was a Viking giant who had never lost a fight. He crushed enemies on distant shores and earned fear across the northern seas. But when he came home after 3 years of raiding, he found himself bound by something stronger than iron, a promise to marry a stranger. She was from their enemy clan, a peace bride hidden behind a veil. Everyone said she was cursed or ugly, maybe both. They whispered she had been kept away from sight for good reason. Asgrim stood at the altar, staring at this silent figure who would become his wife. When the time came to lift her veil, his hands shook for the first time in his life. What he found underneath would change everything he thought he knew about honor and love. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The North Sea had been kind to Asgrim Hardborn. 3 years of raiding across Saxon shores had filled his longship with silver, gold, and the kind of reputation that made enemies flee at the sight of his black sails. He stood at the prow now, watching the familiar cliffs of his homeland rise from the morning mist like the bones of sleeping giants. At 7 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry a warhorse, Asgrim commanded attention wherever he went. His beard, braided with silver rings taken from fallen enemies, reached nearly to his belt. Scars crisscrossed his massive arms, like a map of every battle he had won. In his right hand, he gripped Bonecrusher, the legendary battle axe that had split Saxon shields and Norman helms with equal ease. The weapon's iron head bore the stains of 100 victories, and its ash handle had been worn smooth by 3 years of constant use. "Home at last," muttered Olaf the Red, his second in command, as their ship carved through the dark waters toward the harbor. "Your father will be proud to see how rich we've grown." Asgrim nodded, but something in his chest felt heavy. 3 years was a long time to be away from clan and kin. He had left as a young warrior eager to prove himself. He returned as a man who had seen enough blood to fill a dozen fjords. The harbour of Ironhold appeared around the rocky outcropping, and Asgrim's heart lifted despite his weariness. Smoke rose from the chimneys of familiar longhouses. Children ran along the wooden docks, pointing at the approaching ships. This was home, the place where his father, Thorvald Hardborn, ruled with wisdom and strength, where his mother had sung him to sleep with tales of ancient heroes. But as their ship slid against the dock with a gentle thud, Asgrim noticed something wrong. No one came to greet them. The docks, usually bustling with merchants and fishermen, stood nearly empty. The few people he could see moved with their heads down, avoiding his gaze. "Strange welcome for returning heroes," Olaf observed, securing the mooring lines. Asgrim leaped from the ship to the dock, his boots thundering against the weathered planks. A young boy, the blacksmith's son, if he remembered correctly, started to approach but was quickly pulled away by his mother. She cast Asgrim a look that might have been pity. The walk through the village to his father's great hall felt longer than any march through enemy territory. Windows shuttered as he passed. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. By the time he reached the massive oak doors of the longhouse, Asgrim's battle-honed instincts were screaming that something had gone terribly wrong. The hall that had once echoed with laughter and the clash of drinking horns now felt hollow as a tomb. A few elderly clan members sat near the central fire pit, their faces grim. At the far end, in the high seat where his father should have been holding court, sat his uncle Gunnar, a man Asgrim had never trusted, whose smile always seemed to hide daggers. "Nephew!" Gunnar called out, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "Welcome home. We have much to discuss." Asgrim's hand instinctively moved to Bonecrusher's handle. "Where is my father?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Gunnar rose from the high seat, his movements careful and deliberate. He was a smaller man than Asgrim, but his eyes held the cunning of a fox. "Thorvald died 2 months ago." A fever took him quickly. "He called for you at the end." The words hit Asgrim like a warhammer to the chest. His father, the strongest man he had ever known, gone while he was off collecting Saxon silver. He should have been here. He should have been at his father's side. The funeral? Asgrim's voice came out as a growl. Properly done, Gunnar assured him. He rests with his ancestors in the burial mound, with his weapons and treasures. But before he died, he made certain arrangements. Binding arrangements? Asgrim's eyes narrowed. What arrangements? From the shadows near the high seat stepped forward Eriksson, the clan's law speaker. He was an ancient man, whose memory held every oath, every law, every binding contract made by their people for 3 generations. In his gnarled hands he carried a small iron chest. Your father foresaw troubled times ahead, Eriksson said, his voice creaking like old ship timbers. The Bloodaxe clan to the north grows stronger. They have raided our outlying farms twice this year. War is coming, and we needed allies. The law speaker opened the chest and withdrew a heavy iron ring bearing the wolf sigil of their clan. Asgrim recognized it immediately, his father's blood oath ring, the symbol of unbreakable promises made in the old way. Thorvald swore a binding oath with Jarl Magnus of the Raven's Hollow clan. Eriksson continued. Our ancient enemies would become our allies through marriage. You, as his heir, would wed Magnus's daughter and unite our clans in peace. Asgrim felt the world tilt beneath his feet. I was not here to consent to this. Your father spoke for you, as was his right, Gunnar said smoothly. The oath was sworn in blood before witnesses. Magnus has already sent his daughter. She arrived yesterday. And where is this bride? Asgrim demanded. An uncomfortable shifting rippled through the small gathering. Eriksson cleared his throat. She keeps to the women's quarters. She is... He paused, searching for the right words. She has requested privacy until the wedding ceremony. Privacy. Asgrim's battle-trained mind caught the hesitation. What are you not telling me? Gunnar stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. The girl is veiled. Has been since childhood, according to her escort. There are concerns about her appearance. What kind of concerns? Some say she bears the marks of a curse, whispered one of the elderly clan members. Others claim she was injured in a fire as a child. The Raven's Hollow people speak carefully around the subject. Asgrim looked around the hall at the averted eyes and uncomfortable faces. So my father promised me to a woman no one has seen, from a clan we have feuded with for generations, and I am expected to honor this without question. Honor demands it, Eriksson said firmly. The oath was sworn properly. Magnus has kept his part. His daughter is here ready to wed. If you refuse, you break your father's word and dishonor his memory. Worse, you invite war with both the Raven's Hollow clan for the insult and the Bloodaxe clan, who will see our weakness. The iron ring gleamed in the firelight like a shackle. Asgrim stared at it, feeling the weight of duty and expectation settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. 3 years of freedom on the open seas had not prepared him for this. When is this wedding to take place? He asked finally. Tomorrow at sunset, Gunnar replied. The preparations are already made. The Raven's Hollow delegation waits for your agreement to proceed. Asgrim closed his eyes and thought of his father, not the fever-weakened man who had made this arrangement, but the strong warrior who had taught him that honor was worth more than life itself. Whatever Thorvald's reasons, he had believed this marriage necessary for their clan's survival. I will see her before the ceremony, Asgrim said. Eriksson shook his head. That is not possible. She has requested, and her escort insists, that tradition be followed exactly. The bride and groom meet at the altar, as our ancestors did. Then I go into this blind, as did many great men before you, the law speaker reminded him. Your own grandfather met your grandmother for the first time when he lifted her bridal veil. Asgrim picked up the iron ring and slipped it onto his finger. It felt cold and heavy, like wearing chains. Tell the Raven's Hollow delegation that Asgrim Hardborn will honor his father's word. The wedding will proceed tomorrow. As the clan members began to disperse, murmuring among themselves, Asgrim remained standing by the fire pit. The flames danced and crackled, but they provided no warmth for the cold knot forming in his stomach. Olaf approached cautiously. Are you certain about this, my friend? You could take your ship and leave. There are other lands, other opportunities, and become an oath-breaker, a man without honor. Asgrim shook his head. No, my father bound me to this path. I will walk it. But as he stared into the fire, Asgrim wondered what kind of woman inspired such whispers and demanded such secrecy. Was she truly cursed, hideously scarred? Or was there something else? Something the Raven's Hollow clan preferred to keep hidden until the binding was complete. Tomorrow, when he lifted that veil, he would learn the truth. Whether that truth would be his salvation or his doom remained to be. Seen the weight of Bonecrusher across his back, suddenly felt lighter than the burden of the unknown that awaited him at the altar. The great hall had been transformed for the wedding ceremony. Torches blazed from every iron sconce, casting dancing shadows across the carved wooden pillars that supported the massive roof. Fresh rushes covered the floor, mixed with sweet herbs that filled the air with the scent of summer meadows. The ancient altar, carved from a single block of granite and stained dark with the blood of countless sacrifices, dominated the space before the high seat. Asgrim stood waiting in his finest clothes, a tunic of deep blue wool bordered with silver thread, leather breeches soft as silk, and a cloak fastened with a brooch of polished amber. Around his waist hung his father's ceremonial sword, its pommel worked with the wolf sigil of their clan. Despite the finery, he felt more nervous than he had before any battle. The hall filled slowly with members of both clans. The Hardborn warriors took their places on the left side, their faces carefully neutral, but their hands never far from their weapons. On the right, the Raven's Hollow delegation arranged themselves with equal wariness. These were men and women who had spilled each other's blood for generations. Only the sacred nature of the ceremony kept them civil. At the head of the Raven's Hollow group stood a woman of perhaps 50 winters, her hair silver white and her bearing regal despite the simple brown dress she wore. Her eyes, pale blue as winter ice, seemed to see everything and judge it all wanting. This had to be Astrid, Magnus's sister and the bride's escort. She watched Asgrim with the intensity of a hawk studying prey. Nervous nephew? Gunnar appeared at his elbow, dressed in his own ceremonial finery. His smile was friendly, but Asgrim caught something calculating in his uncle's eyes. Any man would be nervous before meeting his wife, Asgrim replied carefully. Of course, though I imagine you've faced worse things than one small woman. Before Asgrim could respond, the great doors opened and a hush fell over the assembly. A figure appeared in the entrance, completely shrouded in a cloak of midnight blue. Even her face was hidden behind a veil of silver silk that shimmered in the torchlight like moonbeams on water. She moved with grace, despite being unable to see clearly through the delicate fabric, her steps sure and measured. Beside her walked an older man with the bearing of a warrior, but the robes of a priest. This would be Father Ragnar, the Gothi, who would perform the ceremony according to the old ways. His weathered face showed no expression as he guided the veiled bride toward the altar. As they approached, Asgrim studied what little he could see of his bride-to-be. She was smaller than he had expected. The top of her head would barely reach his chest. Her hands, visible where they emerged from the long sleeves of her cloak, appeared unmarked by any scars or deformity. She carried herself with dignity, showing no fear, despite walking into a hall full of strangers who had been her clan's enemies. Father Ragnar raised his staff, and the murmuring crowd fell silent. We gather tonight to witness the binding of two souls, the joining of two clans, and the sealing of an oath sworn in blood and honor. The Gothi's voice boomed through the hall. Let any who would speak against this union do so now, or forever hold their peace. The silence stretched tight as a bowstring. Asgrim could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Then let us proceed. Father Ragnar turned to face Asgrim. Asgrim Hardborn, son of Thorvald, do you come here of your own will to honor your father's oath? I do. His voice came out stronger than he felt. And do you swear to protect, provide for, and honor the woman who will become your wife? I swear it. The Gothi turned to the veiled figure. Thyra, daughter of Magnus, do you come here of your own will to fulfill your father's pledge? I do. Her voice was clear and melodious, with an accent that spoke of distant mountains and deep forests. Something in its tone made Asgrim look at her more closely. And do you swear to honor, support, and stand beside the man who will become your husband? I swear it. There was strength in her voice, not the timid whisper he had expected from a cursed or damaged woman. Father Ragnar produced a silver cup filled with mead. Drink and bind your fates together. Asgrim took the cup first, the sweet honey wine warming his throat. He passed it to Thyra, watching as she lifted her veil just enough to drink. In that brief moment he glimpsed the curve of her lower lip and a hint of pale skin, nothing that suggested curse or deformity. Now, the Gothi announced, let the bride be revealed to her husband and her new clan. This was the moment Asgrim had been dreading. Around the hall, he could feel the collective held breath of both clans. Whispered conversations had followed him all day, speculation about what lay beneath that silver veil. Some claimed she bore the scars of a terrible fire. Others whispered of a curse that had twisted her features. A few even suggested she might be simple-minded, hidden away to spare her family's shame. Asgrim stepped forward, his hands that had never trembled in battle, shaking slightly as he reached for the edge of the veil. Thyra stood perfectly still, but he could sense tension in her posture, as if she were bracing herself for his reaction. The silver silk felt impossibly soft between his fingers. He lifted it slowly, almost reluctantly, preparing himself for whatever truth lay beneath. The veil fell away, and Asgrim felt the world stop. Before him stood the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Her hair was the color of autumn leaves, deep red gold that caught the torchlight and seemed to glow within a fire. Her skin was pale as fresh snow, but unmarked by any blemish or scar. High cheekbones framed a face that could have been carved by the gods themselves, and her lips were the soft pink of apple blossoms. But it was her eyes that truly stunned him. They were the deep green of pine forests, flecked with gold, and they held an intelligence and strength that took his breath away. These were not the eyes of a victim or a damaged woman. These were the eyes of someone who had seen much, learned much, and emerged stronger for it. A collective gasp rose from the assembled crowd. Someone, he thought it might have been one of his own warriors, whispered, "By Thor's hammer." Asgrim stood frozen, the veil still clutched in his suddenly nerveless fingers. This was not what he had been prepared for. This was not the cursed, hideous creature the whispers had led him to expect. This was a woman who could have had her pick of any man in the northern lands. Thyra looked up at him steadily, her green eyes searching his face. "Are you disappointed, husband?" she asked quietly, and there was something in her voice, a note of challenge perhaps, or testing. Disappointed. Asgrim found his voice at last. "No, confused. They told me you were—" He stopped, suddenly aware of the watching crowd. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "They told you I was cursed, ugly? Hidden away for good reason." Her voice was soft, but it carried clearly through the suddenly silent hall. "Something like that," he admitted. "And what do you see?" Asgrim looked at her again, really looked at her. Beyond the stunning beauty, he could see something else in her eyes. Wariness, certainly, but also a keen intelligence and a strength that reminded him of a blade hidden in silk. This was no helpless maiden to be protected and sheltered. This was a woman who could stand as an equal. "I see my wife," he said finally, and meant it. The smile that lit her face was like sunrise after a long night. Around them, the hall erupted in cheers and celebration as the reality of what they were witnessing sank in. The peace bride was not the damaged goods they had expected. She was a prize beyond imagining. But as the noise of celebration swirled around them, Asgrim found himself wondering about something else entirely. If Thyra was as beautiful and intelligent as she appeared, why had she been hidden away? Why the whispers and the veils? What was it about this woman that her own family had wanted to keep secret until the binding was complete? He looked into those remarkable green eyes again and saw something there that sent a chill down his spine. Knowledge, secrets, and perhaps most unsettling of all, the calm confidence of someone who was exactly where she intended to be as Father Ragnar began the final blessing that would make them husband and wife. Asgrim realized that the real mystery was just beginning. The wedding feast that followed was unlike any celebration Asgrim had ever witnessed. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted boar, fresh salmon, wheels of aged cheese, and barrels of mead that flowed like rivers. But beneath the forced merriment, he could sense the undercurrents of tension and curiosity that rippled through both clans. Asgrim sat in the place of honor beside his new wife, acutely aware of every glance, every whispered conversation, every speculative look cast in their direction. The revelation of Thyra's beauty had shocked everyone, but it had also raised new questions that buzzed through the hall like angry wasps. "Your people seem surprised," Thyra observed quietly, cutting a delicate piece of meat with movements that spoke of careful training. Even the way she held her knife showed refinement and education far beyond what he had expected. Can you blame them? "We were told to expect," Asgrim paused, choosing his words carefully. "Something hideous?" Her green eyes sparkled with what might have been amusement. "Yes, I imagine you were. It was necessary. Necessary for what?" Before she could answer, a commotion at one of the lower tables drew their attention. Two men, one from each clan, had risen to their feet, hands moving toward their weapons. The alcohol was loosening tongues and stirring old grudges. "Enough!" Asgrim's voice cut through the rising argument like a blade. Both men immediately sat down, but the damage was done. The fragile piece hung by a thread. Thyra leaned closer to him, close enough that he caught the scent of wildflowers in her hair. "Your authority is well established," she murmured. "But authority built on fear alone is brittle. It breaks when tested." Her words stung because they held truth. Asgrim had ruled through strength and intimidation for so long that he had forgotten there were other ways to lead. "And what would you suggest?" "Watch and learn," she said, rising gracefully from her seat. Before Asgrim could stop her, Thyra walked to the center of the hall. The conversations died as all eyes turned to her. In the flickering torchlight, she seemed to glow like a figure from legend. "My new kinsman," she began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the hall. "I know many of you wonder about me, about why I was hidden away, why the rumors spoke of curses and deformity." She reached into a small leather pouch at her waist and withdrew a set of carved wooden pieces. Even from a distance, Asgrim could see they were rune stones, but these were different from any he had seen. The wood was ancient and dark, polished smooth by countless hands, and the runes carved into them seemed to shift and dance in the firelight. "I am the daughter of Magnus. Yes, but I am also the granddaughter of Helga the Farseer," Thyra continued. "Some of you remember her. She who read the runes and saw the patterns of fate before they unfolded." A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. Asgrim felt his stomach tighten. Helga the Farseer had been legendary and feared. She had been exiled from the Raven's Hollow lands for prophecies that proved too uncomfortable for those in power. "The gift passes through blood," Thyra said simply. "It manifested in me when I was barely old enough to walk. I spoke of things that had not yet happened, saw faces in the flames that belonged to people I had never met. My father, fearing what others would make of such abilities, chose to keep me hidden rather than risk accusations of witchcraft." She held up the runestones so all could see them. "These belong to my grandmother. They have shown me many things over the years, including this night, this feast, this joining of our clans." An uncomfortable silence settled over the hall. Asgrim could see the fear in some faces, fascination in others. Seers were respected but also distrusted. Their knowledge came with a price that not everyone was willing to pay. "What did the runes show you?" asked Astrid, Thyra's escort. Though something in her tone suggested she already knew the answer, Thyra smiled, and for a moment she looked almost otherworldly. "They showed me a giant of a man with scars like a map of victories, whose heart was larger than his body, though he kept it hidden behind walls of iron. They showed me myself, standing in a hall full of strangers who would become family, bound to a destiny larger than any one person's desires." She looked directly at Asgrim then, and he felt as if she were seeing straight through to his soul. "The runes do not lie, husband. What is meant to be will come to pass. But how it unfolds, that depends on the choices we make. With fluid grace, she scattered the runestones on the nearest table. They clattered and rolled, coming to rest in a pattern that meant nothing to Asgrim, but drew gasps from several of the older clan members. "Peace," read Astrid, studying the stones. "Strength through unity. A test of fire that forges rather than destroys." She looked up at Thyra with something approaching awe. "And change, great change for all." Thyra gathered the stones and returned to her seat beside Asgrim. The mood in the hall had shifted. The whispered conversations now carried a different tone, not suspicion and disappointment, but wonder and perhaps a touch of reverence. "That was quite a performance," Asgrim said quietly, as the feast resumed around them. "Was it a performance?" Thyra asked, meeting his gaze steadily. "Or was it the truth presented in a way that people could accept?" He studied her face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. Instead, he found only calm certainty and those remarkable eyes that seemed to hold depths he was only beginning to understand. "The gift is real," she continued, as if reading his thoughts. "I have seen things, known things, that I should not have been able to know. But I have also learned that people fear what they do not understand. It is easier to let them think me mysterious than to let them think me dangerous. And which are you? Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. What do you think, husband?" Before he could answer, old Eric Ironbeard, one of the most respected warriors of the Hardborn clan, approached their table. He was a man whose opinion carried weight with all the others. "Lady Thyra," he said formally, offering a slight bow. "My grandmother used to speak of Helga the Farseer. She said the woman could read the weather in a man's bones and see ships on the horizon 3 days before they appeared." "Your grandmother was wise," Thyra replied graciously. "What else did she tell you?" "That a true seer's gift was not in seeing the future, but in understanding the present so clearly that tomorrow became obvious." Eric's weathered face creased in a smile. "I think she would have liked you." As the old warrior returned to his seat, Asgrim noticed that several other clan members were looking at Thyra with new respect. Her revelation had transformed her from a mysterious burden into something far more valuable, a connection to the old ways, to the wisdom that their people had always revered. "Clever," he admitted. "You turned potential fear into respect." I told them the truth. "Sometimes that is the cleverest thing of all." The feast continued around them, but Asgrim found himself more interested in studying his new wife than in the celebrations. She had revealed one secret tonight, but he sensed there were many more layers to uncover. The question was whether he would have the time to learn them all before whatever crisis the runes had predicted came to pass. As if reading his thoughts again, Thyra placed her hand over his where it rested on the table. Her touch was warm and surprisingly strong. "Patience, husband," she said softly. "Some things are worth the waiting." The morning after the wedding feast found Asgrim awake before dawn, standing at the window of his private chambers and watching the sun paint the eastern sky in shades of gold and crimson. Beside him, Thyra slept peacefully in the great bed, her red-gold hair spread across the furs like spilled honey. Their wedding night had been spent in careful conversation rather than passion, both of them recognizing that trust needed to be built before intimacy could follow. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called quietly, not wanting to wake his wife. Olaf the Red stepped inside, his usually cheerful face grave with concern. "My lord, we need to speak, privately." Asgrim glanced at Thyra, who appeared to still be sleeping, then followed his second-in-command out into the corridor. They walked in silence until they reached the armory, where the thick stone walls would prevent their words from traveling. "What troubles you, old friend?" Olaf pulled out a rolled parchment from his cloak. "This arrived with the Dawn Patrol. A message from the Bloodaxe clan." Asgrim unrolled the parchment and read the contents, his jaw tightening with each line. "They demand tribute for safe passage through waters they do not own, and threaten to burn our outlying farms if we refuse." He looked up at Olaf. "How many ships do they have?" Scouts report at least 15 longships anchored in the hidden bay north of Wolfston, enough men to cause serious damage if they coordinate their attacks properly, and our defenses. We have perhaps half that number of fighting men, and most of our warriors are scattered across the settlements. It would take days to call them all back. Asgrim studied the message again, noting the bold handwriting and the seal pressed into red wax, a double-headed axe that dripped blood. Ragnar Bloodaxe was not known for empty threats. There is something else, Olaf continued reluctantly. Some of the men are wondering if this marriage alliance was truly about peace, or if your uncle had other motives. What do you mean? Think about it. Your father dies conveniently just before your return. Gunnar assumes temporary leadership and arranges a marriage that removes you from consideration as a war leader. Now we face our greatest threat in years, and you are bound to a woman whose loyalties may not lie with our clan. The words hit Asgrim like cold water. He had been so focused on the mystery of his bride that he had not considered the political implications of his uncle's actions. You think Gunnar planned this? I think your uncle is ambitious and sees opportunity in crisis. Whether he actively arranged your father's death or simply took advantage of it, Olaf shrugged. Does it matter? The result is the same. Before Asgrim could respond, a voice spoke from the doorway. It matters greatly. Both men turned to find Thyra standing in the entrance to the armory, fully dressed despite the early hour. Her green eyes were alert and focused, showing no signs of recent sleep. How long have you been listening? Asgrim asked. Long enough to hear accusations of betrayal and conspiracy. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. May I see the message? Asgrim hesitated, then handed her the parchment. She read it quickly, her expression thoughtful. Ragnar Bloodaxe, she murmured. I have heard of him. My grandmother spoke of his grandfather, a man who believed strength could solve any problem, and that taking was easier than earning. What did she say about him? Olaf asked, his suspicion evident in his voice. Thyra looked up from the parchment, and for a moment her eyes seemed to see beyond the present moment. That bloodlines carry curses as well as gifts. The Bloodaxe clan has always chosen the path of conquest over cooperation. They take and take until there is nothing left to sustain them, then they move on to new prey. She handed the message back to Asgrim. This is not about tribute. This is about testing your strength as the new leader. Ragnar wants to see if the marriage has made you weak, if binding yourself to an enemy clan has divided your loyalties and your forces. And has it? Asgrim asked quietly. That depends on what you choose to do next. From her cloak, Thyra withdrew a rolled parchment that looked far older than the Bloodaxe message. The edges were yellowed with age, and the leather tie that bound it was worn smooth by handling. What is that? Asgrim asked. Something my father gave me before I left for the wedding. He called it insurance against difficult times. She unrolled the ancient parchment carefully, revealing lines of text written in the old runes. This is a chronicle of both our clans, dating back 12 generations. It tells a different story than the one our people remember. Asgrim leaned closer to study the faded writing. The runes were archaic, difficult to read, but he could make out enough to understand the basic meaning. This speaks of an alliance between our ancestors, a mutual defense pact. More than that, Thyra said, tracing the lines with her finger. It tells of how the Hardborn and Ravenshollow clans once stood together against a great threat from the north, how they shared resources, knowledge, and blood to defeat an enemy that would have destroyed them both. The Blood Kings, Olaf whispered, reading over Asgrim's shoulder. But that was legend, surely. Stories told to frighten children. All legends contain truth, Thyra replied. The Blood Kings were real. Raiders who took no prisoners, who burned everything they could not carry, who believed that only the strong deserved to live. They were stopped by an alliance of southern clans, led by our ancestors. She pointed to a specific passage. Here it says that the alliance was sealed by marriage, just as ours has been. And here she moved her finger down the page. It speaks of a prophecy, that when the Blood Raiders return, the alliance must be renewed or all will fall. Asgrim felt a chill run down his spine. Are you saying the Blood Axe clan are descendants of these Blood Kings? I am saying that some patterns repeat themselves across generations. Ragnar Bloodaxe follows the same path as his ancestors, conquest without consideration for consequences. He will not stop with tribute from your clan. He will take everything until there is nothing left. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If Thyra was right, they were facing not just a raiding threat, but the beginning of a larger conflict that could engulf all the northern clans. Assuming this chronicle is accurate, Asgrim said carefully, what does it suggest we do? What our ancestors did. Stand together. Share resources and knowledge. Trust in the alliance that has been renewed through our marriage. Olaf looked skeptical. And how do we know this is not some elaborate deception? How do we know the Raven's Hollow clan is not planning to betray us once we lower our defenses? Thyra met his gaze steadily. Because if we fall to the Blood Axe clan, we fall first. Our lands lie between theirs and yours. If Ragnar succeeds in conquering you, we will be next, and we will face him alone. She rolled up the chronicle carefully. My father may be many things, but he is not a fool. He knows that our survival depends on your survival. Asgrim studied his wife's face, searching for any sign of deception. Instead, he found only earnest conviction and something else. Hope, perhaps, that he would choose to trust her. What do you propose? He asked finally. Send word to my father. Tell him about the Blood Axe threat and invoke the old alliance. Combine our forces and face Ragnar together. Show him that the marriage has made us stronger, not weaker. It was a gamble that could save them all or doom them completely. But as Asgrim looked at the ancient chronicle and remembered the fear he had seen in the eyes of his people, he realized they had few other choices. Draft the message, he told Olaf. We call upon our new allies. 3 days after sending the message to Magnus Raven's Hollow, Asgrim stood in the clan's smithy, watching his wife work alongside the master blacksmith. Thyra had surprised everyone by asking to help forge weapons for the coming conflict, claiming knowledge passed down from her grandmother. Now, as sparks flew from the hammer blows, he could see she had not been boasting. The iron must sing the right song, Thyra said, holding up a blade that glowed cherry red in the forge light. Listen, do you hear how it rings when struck? That tells you if the metal is true. Old Thormund, the smithy master, nodded approvingly as he examined her work. Your grandmother taught you well, lady. This blade will hold its edge through many battles. Asgrim watched as Thyra plunged the hot metal into the quenching oil, sending up a hiss of steam and the acrid smell of burning metal. Her movements were confident and precise, showing a familiarity with the craft that spoke of years of practice, not casual observation. Where did you really learn smithing? He asked when they took a break from the work. Thyra wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of soot across her forehead. My grandmother believed that those who can see the future should also be able to shape the present. She taught me many skills: smithing, healing, reading the weather patterns, understanding the language of animals. She picked up a length of iron that would become a spear point and examined it critically. When you are hidden away from the world, you fill the time with learning. Every skill might someday prove useful. And the runes, the visions, those came naturally like breathing. But my grandmother taught me to control them, to seek visions rather than simply endure them. Thyra looked at him directly, her green eyes serious. Would you like to know what I saw the night before our wedding? Asgrim felt his stomach tighten. What did you see? Instead of answering immediately, Thyra moved to her leather satchel and withdrew something wrapped in soft cloth. When she unwrapped it, Asgrim saw a knife unlike any he had ever seen. The blade was polished steel that seemed to capture and hold light, while the handle was carved from what looked like whalebone and inlaid with silver wire. I saw you and me, standing back to back in a great battle, each protecting the other. I saw this blade in your hand, cutting through our enemies like wheat before a scythe. She held the weapon out to him, handle first. I forged this while we were traveling to your lands, guided by the vision. It is my wedding gift to you. Asgrim took the knife carefully, testing its weight and balance. It felt perfect in his hand, as if it had been made specifically for his grip. The blade was razor-sharp and flexible, ideal for close combat. Along the fuller, etched so finely they were almost invisible, ran a line of protective runes. "It is magnificent," he said honestly. "But you said you saw us fighting together. That suggests you trust me to protect you, not simply use you for political advantage. Trust is earned through actions, not words." Thyra turned back to the forge and began heating another piece of iron. "But yes, I trust you, more than I trusted anyone when I arrived here." "Why?" She was quiet for a moment, focusing on the glowing metal. "Because you could have taken what you wanted on our wedding night, and you chose not to. Because you listen when I speak, rather than simply waiting for your turn to talk. Because when your friend questioned my motives, you defended me without knowing whether I deserved it." Asgrim slipped the knife into his belt, feeling its comforting weight. "What else did the vision show you?" "Darkness coming from the north, like a tide of blood and iron. Men who fight not for honor or clan, but for the joy of destruction itself." Her hammer rang against the anvil in steady rhythm. "And I saw hope, an alliance forged not just in necessity, but in genuine partnership. Two clans becoming stronger together than either could be alone." "Thyra," he waited until she looked at him. "If this alliance fails, if the Bloodaxe clan proves too strong, what then? Then we face whatever comes together. That is what marriage means, is it not? Two people choosing to stand side by side against whatever the world brings." Before Asgrim could respond, a horn sounded from the watchtower. 3 long blasts that meant riders approaching. He grabbed his cloak and rushed outside, Thyra close behind him. From the direction of Raven's Hollow Lands, a small group of horsemen approached at full gallop. Even at a distance, Asgrim could see they rode hard, as if pursued or bearing urgent news. As they drew closer, he recognized the lead rider, Magnus Ravenshollow himself. His silver beard streaming in the wind, the Ravenshollow Jarl reined in his horse before the great hall, his mount lathered with sweat and breathing hard. Magnus was a man of perhaps 60 winters, still strong, but showing the weight of years and responsibility. His eyes found Thyra immediately, and relief flooded his weathered features. "Daughter," he said, dismounting and striding toward them. "I came as soon as I received your message." "Father." Thyra moved to embrace him, and Asgrim could see genuine affection between them, despite the years of separation. "You made good time. When raiders threaten my daughter's new home, I do not delay." Magnus turned to face Asgrim, and for a moment the two men sized each other up like wolves meeting for the first time. "Son-in-law." "Your message spoke of an ancient alliance and a present threat. Both are real," Asgrim replied. "Come inside. We have much to discuss." In the great hall, over mugs of ale and platters of bread and cheese, they spread maps on the large oak table and planned their strategy. Magnus had brought 20 of his best warriors, and promised another 40 would follow within days. "The Bloodaxe clan has grown bold," Magnus said, pointing to locations on the map where raids had been reported. "They have struck 3 settlements in the past month, taking everything of value and burning what they could not carry." "Any survivors?" Asgrim asked. "Few, and those who escaped speak of raiders who showed no mercy to young or old, who seemed to take pleasure in the killing itself." Magnus's expression darkened. "This is not raiding for profit. This is conquest for its own sake." Thyra leaned over the map, studying the pattern of attacks. "Look at the progression. They are moving steadily south, but not in a straight line. They are testing defenses, learning which settlements are weakly defended and which are too strong to assault directly. Building towards something larger," Asgrim agreed. "But what?" "A coordinated assault on the major settlements," Magnus said grimly. "If they can take your stronghold and mine in quick succession, they will control the entire northern coast. The smaller clans will have no choice but to submit or flee." The 3 of them stared at the map in silence, each understanding the magnitude of what they faced. The Bloodaxe clan was not just seeking tribute or territory, they were attempting to reshape the entire balance of power in the north. "How long do we have?" Asgrim asked. "Based on their pattern of movement, perhaps a fortnight before they are ready to strike," Magnus replied. "We must be ready before then." Thyra placed her hand on the map, covering the location of their combined settlements. Then we make our stand here together. Show them that the old alliance still has teeth. Asgrim looked at his wife and his new father-in-law, realizing that somewhere in the past few days, the political marriage had become something more. These were people he was beginning to care about. People worth fighting beside. Together, he agreed, and meant it completely. The night after Magnus's arrival, Asgrim woke to find Thyra's side of the bed empty. Moonlight streamed through the window, casting silver patterns on the wooden floor. He could hear her moving about quietly in the adjoining chamber, and the soft sound of her voice speaking words he could not quite make out. Concerned, he rose and padded barefoot to the doorway. What he saw made him pause in the shadows, reluctant to intrude on what was clearly a private moment. Thyra knelt before a small altar she had constructed on a wooden chest. Candles flickered around a collection of objects, smooth stones, dried herbs, and a crystal pendant that caught the light and threw rainbows across the walls. She held the pendant in both hands, her eyes closed, her lips moving in what sounded like an ancient chant. The crystal began to glow with its own inner light, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Thyra's breathing quickened, and Asgrim could see tension building in her shoulders. Suddenly she gasped, and her eyes flew open, wide with fear. "No," she whispered, staring at the pendant as if it had betrayed her. "Not again. Please, not again." Asgrim stepped into the room. "Thyra, what is it?" She spun toward him, the crystal clutched protectively against her chest. For a moment, he saw not the confident woman who had charmed his clan and forged weapons beside Master Smith's, but someone much younger and terribly frightened. "I saw—" She stopped, collecting herself with visible effort. "The visions are stronger at night. Sometimes they show things I would rather not see." "What did you see?" Thyra looked down at the crystal pendant, its glow fading to match the candlelight. "Fire, ships burning on dark waters, men screaming as they died." She met his eyes. "Your ships, Asgrim. Your men." A chill ran down his spine. "When?" "Soon, perhaps tomorrow night, perhaps the night after." The vision was unclear about time, but certain about outcome. She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the harbor where their longships rested peacefully at anchor. "They will come in darkness, hoping to destroy our vessels before we can mount a proper defense." Asgrim joined her at the window. In the moonlight, he could see the familiar shapes of their boats, 23 longships that represented the mobility and strength of his clan. Without them, they would be trapped on land, unable to maneuver or escape if the battle went badly. "You are certain of this vision?" "As certain as I was about our meeting, about your nature, about the alliance with my father." Thyra's voice carried a weight of old pain. "I have learned not to doubt what the crystal shows me, no matter how much I might wish to. The crystal belonged to your grandmother." "My mother!" The words came out barely above a whisper. "She wore it the night she died." Asgrim turned to study Thyra's profile in the moonlight. "How did she die?" For a long moment he thought she would not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat and emotionless, as if she were reciting facts about a stranger. "I was 7 years old. My mother had been having visions for weeks, dark visions of men coming in the night, of blood and fire and death. She tried to warn my father, but he was away raiding, and her messages never reached him in time." Thyra's hand moved unconsciously to the crystal pendant. "The night they came, she woke me and told me to hide in the root cellar beneath our house. She said to stay there no matter what I heard, no matter what happened. Then she kissed me and went out to face them. Them. Raiders from the Bloodaxe clan. The same ones we face now, or their fathers and uncles." Her voice grew harder. "They had come for my mother specifically. Someone had told them about her gift, about her visions. They wanted to know what she had seen about their future raids." Asgrim felt sick understanding, beginning to dawn. What happened to her? She would not tell them what they wanted to know. So they tortured her, trying to break her will. Thyra's hands clenched into fists. I could hear her screaming from the cellar. It went on for hours before it finally stopped. "Thyra, when my father returned 3 days later, he found me still hiding in the cellar, half mad with hunger and terror. My mother's body was in the main room, and the crystal pendant was around her neck, somehow untouched by the blood. She touched the pendant again. That was when he decided I needed to be hidden away, protected until I was old enough and strong enough to defend myself. The pieces of her story fell into place like stones in a mosaic. That is why you were kept secret. Not because you were cursed or ugly, but because your gift made you a target. My father learned to fear what people would do to possess the power of prophecy. Better to let them think me damaged than to risk them discovering what I could really do. She turned from the window to face him. But the hiding is over now. I'm bound to you and you to me. Whatever comes, we face it together. Asgrim reached out and took her hands in his. They were cold despite the warmth of the room. The vision of the ships burning. Is there a way to prevent it? Perhaps. If we move quickly and prepare properly. Thyra squeezed his hands. But we will need to trust each other completely. There can be no doubt, no hesitation. Before Asgrim could respond, footsteps sounded in the corridor outside. A moment later, someone knocked urgently on their door. "My lord," came Olaf's voice. "You need to come quickly. The sentries have spotted signal fires on the northern headlands." Asgrim and Thyra exchanged glances. Signal fires meant enemy ships had been sighted, moving under cover of darkness toward their coast. "How many fires?" Asgrim called through the door. "7, my lord." Spaced along the entire northern approach, 7 signal fires meant at least 7 enemy ships, possibly more. Thyra's vision was already beginning to unfold. "Gather the captains," Asgrim ordered. "Full battle alert. All ships to be ready for immediate departure." "At once, my lord." As Olaf's footsteps receded, Thyra moved swiftly to dress in practical clothes, leather breeches, a wool tunic, and soft boots suitable for moving quickly and quietly. From a chest, she withdrew a curved dagger and strapped it to her thigh. "What are you doing?" Asgrim asked, pulling on his own gear. "Coming with you. If we are to prevent the vision from coming true, you will need someone who knows exactly how it unfolds." She met his eyes steadily. "This is not a time for me to remain safely in the women's quarters." Asgrim wanted to argue, to insist that she stay behind where it was safe. But one look at her face told him it would be useless. This was not the frightened child who had hidden in a root cellar 20 years ago. This was a woman who had chosen to step out of the shadows and claim her place in the world. "Stay close to me," he said finally. "And if I tell you to run, you run. No heroics." "Agreed." She smiled, and for a moment she looked like the young woman she should have been allowed to be. "Shall we go save our ships?" Together they headed for the door, and whatever darkness awaited them beyond, the harbor was alive with controlled chaos as Asgrim and Thyra arrived. Warriors ran between the ships, loading weapons and supplies by torchlight. The captains had gathered near the largest vessel, their faces grim in the flickering flames. Magnus stood among them, already dressed for battle despite the late hour. "Report," Asgrim commanded as he approached the group. 15 enemy ships confirmed," said Captain Bjorn, a grizzled veteran whose scars told stories of a dozen sea battles. "They are moving south along the coast, staying far enough out to avoid our sentries, but close enough to strike quickly. Their target has to be our ships. If they can burn us out while we are at anchor, they can attack the settlement without fear of pursuit or escape." Thyra stepped forward, her hand resting on the crystal pendant beneath her tunic. "They will come in 3 waves. The first will try to set fire to the ships on the outer edge of the harbor. The second will target the largest vessels in the center. The third will attempt to blockade the harbor mouth to prevent any escape." The captains turned to stare at her, some with skepticism, others with the beginning of respect. Magnus nodded slowly. "My daughter's visions have never proven false," he said quietly. "If she says 3 waves, we prepare for 3 waves. With respect." "Jarl Magnus," Captain Bjorn said carefully, "visions are one thing." But his words were cut off by a shout from the harbor watch. "Ships approaching. 3 points off the northern headland." Everyone turned to look where the sentry pointed. In the distance, barely visible against the dark water, they could see the outlines of longships moving steadily toward them. "First wave," Thyra said simply. 6 ships carrying fire arrows and oil pots. They will try to create chaos and confusion while the larger force prepares for the main assault. Asgrim made his decision quickly. Bjorn, take your ship and 2 others. Intercept them before they reach firing range. Magnus, can your men handle the harbor defenses? My warriors know these waters better than their own mothers' faces, Magnus replied. We will be ready. As the captains dispersed to their ships, Thera caught Asgrim's arm. There is something else. Something the vision showed me that I did not mention before the others. What? Instead of answering, she led him away from the bustle of preparation to a quiet spot near the stone quay. From her cloak, she withdrew a leather pouch that looked far older than anything else she carried. The leather was black with age and worn smooth by countless hands. This belonged to my grandmother, she said, opening the pouch to reveal a collection of carved stone tablets. They are not rune stones for divination. They are prophecy stones, carved by the first seers of our bloodline. Even in the dim light, Asgrim could see that the stones were ancient beyond measure. The carvings seemed to shift and dance in the torchlight, as if the prophecies themselves were alive. What do they say? Thyra selected one of the stones and held it up so he could see the intricate carvings. This one speaks of the returning darkness, raiders who follow the old ways of blood and conquest, who will sweep down from the north like a tide of death. It says they will not stop until all the coastal clans are either destroyed or enslaved. She picked up another stone. This one speaks of the alliance of necessity, 2 ancient enemies who must join together or watch everything they hold dear turn to ash and ruin. Our marriage, Asgrim said. Understanding beginning to dawn. Our marriage was not arranged by our fathers, Thera said quietly. It was foretold by my ancestors centuries ago. Every detail, the giant warrior from the shield wall, the hidden daughter of the Farseer bloodline, the joining that would either save the northern clans or witness their destruction. She held up a 3rd stone, this one larger than the others, and carved with symbols that seemed almost alive in the flickering light. And this one speaks of the final choice. When the darkness comes in full force, the Alliance must face a test that will determine not just their own fate, but the fate of everyone under the northern sky. Asgrim stared at the prophecy stone, feeling the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. What kind of test? The stone is unclear about details, but certain about consequence. We must choose between personal survival and the greater good, between the safety of our immediate families and the protection of all the clans. The choice we make will echo through generations. Before Asgrim could respond, a horn sounded from the harbor, the signal that enemy ships had been spotted within striking distance. The first wave of the attack was about to begin. We should go, he said, but Thyra caught his arm again. There is one more thing, the most important thing. She held up the final stone, and Asgrim could see that this one was different from the others. Where the others were carved from granite or slate, this one appeared to be made from some kind of crystal that glowed with its own inner light. The prophecy stone, she whispered. It speaks of a power that sleeps in the bloodline of the Farseers, waiting for the moment of greatest need. When the darkness threatens to overwhelm everything, this power will awaken, but only if both halves of the Alliance stand together in perfect trust. What kind of power? I do not know. My grandmother died before she could teach me about this stone, but I can feel something stirring within it, as if it recognizes that the time of prophecy is at hand. The stone pulsed with soft light, and for a moment Asgrim thought he could hear something, a whisper of wind through ancient trees, or perhaps the voices of long-dead seers calling across the centuries. Thyra, he said slowly, are you telling me that our marriage was not just a political alliance, but the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy? I am telling you that everything we do from this moment forward will determine whether the northern clans survive the coming darkness or fall into chaos and slavery. She tucked the stones back into their pouch. The Blood Axe clan is not just raiding for profit or territory. They are the vanguard of something much larger and more terrible. What do you mean? The old stories speak of a time when raiders from across the northern sea will unite under a single banner, seeking to destroy the settled clans and return the world to chaos and blood. If Ragnar Bloodaxe succeeds in conquering our lands, others will follow his example. War will spread like wildfire until civilization itself is swept away. Asgrim felt his understanding of their situation shift and expand. This was not just about two clans defending themselves against raiders. This was about standing as the last barrier against a tide of destruction that could consume everything. And the prophecy says we can stop this. The prophecy says we have the power to stop it if we choose to use it. Thyra's green eyes were serious in the torchlight. But prophecies are tricky things. They show what might be, not what will be. The choices we make will determine which future comes to pass. Another horn blast echoed across the harbor, this one longer and more urgent. The enemy ships were closing fast. Then we had better make the right choices, Asgrim said, taking her hand. Together, she agreed. As they ran toward the waiting ships, Asgrim realized that everything he thought he knew about his life had just changed. He was no longer simply a warrior defending his clan, or even a chieftain protecting his people. He was part of something much larger, a destiny that had been set in motion long before he was born. The question now was whether he and Thyra would prove worthy of the trust placed in them by generations of ancestors, and whether their love would prove strong enough to bear the weight of prophecy. Behind them, the prophecy stone pulsed with increasing intensity, as if responding to the approaching danger. Whatever power slept within the ancient crystal, it was beginning to wake up. The sea battle that followed was swift and decisive. Captain Bjorn's ships intercepted the first wave of Bloodaxe raiders before they could reach the harbor, turning their fireships into floating torches that lit up the night sky. By dawn, the immediate threat had been repelled, but everyone knew it was only the beginning. Standing on the wooden pier as the victorious ships returned, Asgrim watched the smoke rising from the burning enemy vessels and felt no satisfaction. Thyra stood beside him, the prophecy stone glowing faintly through the leather of her pouch, as if responding to the violence that had just taken place. "How long do we have?" he asked quietly. 3 days, perhaps 4, she replied, her eyes distant with the weight of visions only she could see. "Ragnar will not make the same mistake twice. When he comes again, it will be with his full force and a plan that accounts for our defenses." Magnus approached from where he had been coordinating with his captains. His silver beard was singed from the fighting, and his cloak bore scorch marks from enemy fire arrows. "My scouts report movement in the northern camps," he said grimly. "Signal fires burning all night, messengers riding between the scattered raiding bands. They are gathering their forces. How many?" Asgrim asked. "More than we have faced before. Perhaps 30 ships, carrying upward of 1,000 warriors." Magnus looked out at their own fleet, counting silently. "We can muster perhaps 600 fighting men between our clans. And that includes boys, barely old enough to hold a spear, and old men who should be sitting by their hearths." The mathematics of warfare were stark and unforgiving. Even with the advantage of defending familiar territory, they would be outnumbered nearly 2 to 1. "There is another way," Thyra said quietly. Both men turned to look at her. In the morning light, she seemed changed somehow, older, more focused, as if the events of the night had awakened something that had been sleeping within her. "The war horn of the ancestors," she continued, pulling a wrapped bundle from her cloak. "My grandmother left this in my care, along with instructions for its use." She unwrapped the bundle to reveal an ancient horn carved from what looked like the tusk of some massive sea beast. The surface was covered in runes, so old that even Asgrim, who could read the ancient script, had difficulty making out their meaning. The horn seemed to emanate a sense of age and power that made the hair on his arms stand up. "What does it do?" Magnus asked, his voice hushed with reverence. "When blown by one of the bloodline under the right circumstances, it can call all the allied clans to war," Thyra explained. "Not just our immediate neighbors, but every clan that has ever sworn the old oaths of mutual defense." Asgrim studied the ancient artifact. How many clans? In my grandmother's time, 17 clans answered the call when it was last sounded. That was during the war against the Sea Kings 3 generations ago. Thyra turned the horn in her hands, examining the intricate carvings. But there is a price. The horn can only be sounded when the threat is truly existential, when the survival of our entire way of life hangs in the balance. And you believe this qualifies? I know it does. The visions have shown me what happens if Ragnar Bloodaxe succeeds here. His victory will inspire other raiders, other would-be conquerors. Within a generation, the northern seas will be ruled by chaos and blood. The settled clans, the farmers and craftsmen and traders who have built our civilization, all of it will be swept away. Magnus nodded slowly. My father told stories of the war horn. He said that when it sounded, every warrior who heard it was bound by the oldest laws to come to the aid of the caller. No matter what other conflicts or obligations they might have, then we sound it, Asgrim said decisively. Tonight, when the moon is full and the call will carry farthest, there is more you need to know, Thyra said, her expression growing troubled. The horn's power comes with conditions. It must be blown from the highest point of the land being defended, by one who has the right of blood and the backing of the alliance. And she paused, as if reluctant to continue. And what? The one who sounds it must be prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice if the battle goes badly. The horn binds not just those who answer the call, but the one who makes it. If we lose this fight, the horn caller's life is forfeit to preserve the honor of the ancient pacts. The weight of this revelation settled over them like a heavy shroud. Asgrim looked at the horn, understanding now why such a powerful tool was not used lightly. I will sound it, he said. No, Thyra's voice was firm. It must be me. The blood right comes through the seer line, and I am the last of my grandmother's direct descendants. The horn will not work for anyone else. Absolutely not. Asgrim's response was immediate and fierce. I will not allow my wife to place herself in such danger. It is not your choice to make. Thyra's green eyes flashed with determination. This is what I was born for, what my bloodline has been preparing for through generations of seers and keepers of the old ways. You cannot protect me from my destiny. Magnus looked between his daughter and son-in-law, understanding the conflict that was tearing at both of them. Perhaps there is another way. The horn requires blood right and alliance backing. Thyra has the blood right, but the alliance backing comes from both clans standing together. What if you both sound it? Is that possible? Asgrim asked. Thyra considered this, running her fingers over the ancient runes. The old stories speak of the horn being sounded by multiple voices when the threat was great enough. It has never been tried by a married pair who represented the alliance themselves, but she paused, studying one particular set of carvings. Yes, I think it could work. In fact, it might make the call even stronger. Then that is what we will do, Asgrim said with relief. Together, as everything else has been. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Warriors streamed in from the outlying settlements, bringing weapons and supplies. The smiths worked day and night, forging spear points and arrowheads. The women prepared bandages and healing salves, knowing that the coming battle would test every skill they possessed. Thyra spent hours with the prophecy stone, seeking visions of the battle to come. Each session left her drained and pale, but also more determined. She shared what she could, the likely timing of the attack, the direction it would come from, the strategies Ragnar Bloodaxe would likely employ. On the second night, as they sat by the fire in their private chambers, she showed Asgrim something that made his blood run cold. He has shamans with him, she said quietly, indicating a vision stone that glowed with sickly red light. Dark practitioners who serve the old chaos gods. They are working to counter my visions, to hide their plans behind veils of blood magic. Can they succeed? Partially. I can see the shape of what is coming, but not the details. We will have to trust in our preparations and our warriors when the time comes. And the power you mentioned, the one that sleeps in your bloodline? Thyra looked at the prophecy stone, which had been pulsing with increasing frequency as the battle approached. "I can feel it stirring, but I do not know how to control it. My grandmother died before she could teach me, and there are no written records. When the moment comes, I will have to trust in instinct and hope." On the third day, scouts brought word that the enemy fleet had been sighted. 43 ships carrying the largest raiding force seen in living memory. They would arrive with the evening tide, when the light would favor their attack, and the darkness would hide their true numbers. As sunset approached, Asgrim and Thyra climbed to the highest tower of the stronghold, carrying the war horn between them. Below, their combined forces made final preparations, sharpening weapons, checking armor, saying prayers to whatever gods they favored. "Are you ready?" Asgrim asked, placing his hands on the ancient horn beside Thyra's. "No," she said honestly, "but readiness is not required, only willingness." Together they raised the war horn to their lips. The ancient artifact felt warm despite the cool evening air, and Asgrim could swear he felt the presence of countless ancestors standing with them. "For the Alliance," Thyra whispered. "For the Alliance," he agreed. They blew the horn together, and the sound that emerged was unlike anything Asgrim had ever heard. It was not just the deep, resonant call of a war horn, but something that seemed to echo across time itself, carrying the voices of every warrior who had ever stood against the darkness, every defender who had chosen duty over safety. The sound rolled across the land like thunder, carrying over mountains and valleys, reaching into distant settlements where allied clans would hear the call and know that the hour of ultimate testing had come. As the echoes faded, they pointed to the horizon where the first enemy sails were becoming visible against the darkening sky. "They come," she said simply. "Then we are ready for them," Asgrim replied, feeling the strength of the Alliance flowing through him like fire in his veins. The final battle was about to begin. The Bloodaxe fleet arrived with the darkness, their black sails blotting out the stars like a plague of ravens. From the watchtower, Asgrim could see the full scope of what they faced. 43 long ships arranged in a crescent formation that would allow them to attack the harbor from multiple directions simultaneously, just as the vision showed, Thyra whispered beside him, her hand resting on her father's shield, the artifact that connected Asgrim to his legacy while allowing him to forge his own path. The ancient shield bore the scars of 100 battles, its iron boss polished bright by generations of use. Below in the harbor, their own fleet waited in careful formation. 28 ships crewed by the best warriors both clans could muster, each vessel positioned to maximize their defensive advantage. It was still not enough to match the enemy numbers, but it would have to suffice until the war horn's call brought reinforcements. "Signal fires," Magnus called from his position near the beacon tower. 3 clans have already answered the horn, the Iron Hills, the Stormcrows, and the Bear's Lairs. Their ships approached from the south. Asgrim felt a surge of hope. 3 clans meant perhaps another 200 warriors, enough to even the odds considerably. But they would need to hold out until the reinforcements arrived. "There," Thyra pointed toward the enemy fleet. "The ship with the red sails. That is Ragnar's flagship. Do you see the banners?" Asgrim squinted through the darkness and could make out the distinctive double-headed axe that dripped blood, painted in stark white against the crimson sail. The ship was massive, easily twice the size of any vessel in their own fleet. "He means to land his main force on the eastern beach," Thyra continued, her voice taking on the distant quality it held when the visions came strongest. "The ships attacking the harbor are a diversion. His real target is the settlement itself. How can you be certain?" "Because that is what I would do." She turned to look at him, and her eyes held a glint of strategic cunning that reminded him she was Magnus's daughter. "Destroy our ships to prevent escape, then burn the settlement to deny us any defensive positions. Force us to fight in the open, where his numbers give him the greatest advantage." A horn blast echoed across the water, not the ancient war horn they had sounded, but the harsh, discordant call of the Bloodaxe raiders. It was answered by dozens of others as the enemy fleet began to move. "They come," Asgrim said, gripping his father's shield more tightly. The familiar weight was comforting, a connection to all the battles that had come before. The first wave of enemy ships struck their harbor defenses like a hammer blow. Fire arrows arced through the darkness, trailing sparks as they sought wooden targets. The defenders responded with their own volleys, sending shafts whistling toward the attacking vessels. From his vantage point, Asgrim could see the battle unfolding in scattered points of light, the glow of burning sails, the flash of steel in moonlight, the sparks that flew when blade met blade. The sound was a cacophony of shouts, clashing metal, and the groaning of wood under stress. "The eastern beach," Thera said urgently. "They are landing there now." Asgrim looked where she pointed and saw the dark shapes of longships being driven up onto the sand. Warriors poured from the vessels like ants from a disturbed hill, their weapons gleaming in the light of the torches they carried. How many? Too many. Thyra's voice was grim. "Perhaps 400 men, including Ragnar himself. They will try to take the settlement before we can reposition our forces. Then we go to meet them." Asgrim turned toward the stairs leading down from the tower. "Signal Magnus to hold the harbor. We take every available warrior and march for the beach." "Wait." Thyra caught his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "There is something else. The shamans, they are working a spell to hide their true numbers. What we see may not be what is really there." Asgrim paused, understanding the implications. If the enemy was using dark magic to conceal their strength, they could be walking into a trap far worse than anything they had prepared for. What do? "You suggest?" Instead of answering immediately, Thyra drew the prophecy stone from its pouch. The ancient crystal was glowing more brightly than he had ever seen it, pulsing with inner fire that seemed to respond to the violence erupting around them. "The power," she said quietly. I think it is time." "Are you certain? You said you did not know how to control it." "Control may not be necessary. Sometimes you must trust in forces greater than yourself." She looked at him with eyes that held both fear and determination. "Will you stand with me, whatever happens?" "Always," he said without hesitation. Thyra raised the prophecy stone above her head, and suddenly the crystal blazed with light, bright enough to illuminate the entire harbor. The radiance washed over the battlefield like a cleansing tide, and Asgrim heard gasps of awe from both friend and foe. Where the light touched the enemy ships, illusions fell away like shadows before the dawn. Instead of 43 vessels, Asgrim could now see the truth. Nearly 60 ships, many of them hidden by the shaman's magic until this moment. "By Thor's hammer," he breathed. "They have nearly 1,500 warriors," but even as despair threatened to overwhelm him, he heard something that made his heart leap, the sound of war horns echoing from the southern approaches. Not one or two, but dozens of them, calling in harmony like a choir of bronze and steel. "The clans," Thyra said, her voice filled with wonder. "They all came, every clan that ever swore the ancient oaths." Across the southern horizon, sails appeared like a forest of white and red and gold. Ship after ship crested the waves, carrying warriors who had heard the war horn's call and abandoned everything to answer it. The tide of battle was about to turn. The arrival of the allied clans transformed the battle from desperate defense to thunderous collision of two great forces. Asgrim watched from the tower as ship after ship swept into the harbor, their warriors leaping onto the docks with weapons already drawn. The sound of their war cries echoed off the cliffs like the roar of an avalanche. 17 clans, Thyra said, counting the different banners streaming in the torchlight. Just as the prophecy foretold, the old alliances hold true, but even as hope surged through him, Asgrim could see that Ragnar Bloodaxe was not finished. The massive chieftain stood on the beach where his forces had landed, his own battle axe raised high. Even at a distance, his voice carried clearly across the water as he rallied his warriors for one final push. "He knows this is his last chance," Thyra observed. "If he cannot break us now, His raiders will scatter, and his power will be broken forever. Then we end this. Asgrim took up his battle gear, Bone Crusher strapped across his back, his father's shield on his arm, and Thyra's forged knife at his belt. "Stay here where it is safe." "No." Thyra's voice was firm as she drew her own weapons. From her cloak she produced a sword that gleamed with an inner light. Not steel, but something that looked like crystallized starlight. "This is the Unity. Blade reforged from both our clan's ancestral weapons while you slept. Our smiths worked through the night to complete it." Asgrim stared at the extraordinary weapon. The blade seemed to contain the essence of both their bloodlines. Runes from his clan's tradition flowed seamlessly into the mystical symbols of hers, creating something entirely new, yet rooted in ancient power. "We fight together," Thyra continued, "as the prophecy always intended, as husband and wife, as the alliance made flesh." They descended from the tower together, moving through the controlled chaos of their forces, preparing for the final assault. Warriors from 17 clans stood shoulder to shoulder, their differences forgotten in the face of the threat that would destroy them all. Magnus appeared through the crowd, his silver beard braided with the colors of all the allied clans. "The harbor is secure. Ragnar's fleet is trapped between our ships and the allied reinforcements, but he still has 1,500 warriors on the beach, and they are forming for a charge against the settlement." "How many do we have?" "Nearly 1,200 now, with the reinforcements. Still outnumbered, but not by much." Magnus looked toward the beach, where torches blazed like fallen stars. "They will come at dawn, when the light favors their advance. Then we meet them in the shallows," Asgrim decided. "Force them to fight with water at their backs and nowhere to retreat." As the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, both armies moved toward their final confrontation. The beach stretched wide and flat, perfect for the kind of massive battle that would decide the fate of all the northern clans. Ragnar Bloodaxe stood at the center of his formation, a giant nearly as tall as Asgrim himself. His armor was black iron decorated with silver skulls, and his double-headed axe had tasted the blood of 100 chieftains. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man who had never known defeat. "Surrender now, and I will grant you quick deaths," he called across the water. "Continue this resistance, and I will burn your settlements, enslave your children, and feed your elders to the ravens." Asgrim stepped forward, his father's shield gleaming in the dawnlight. "We offer you the same choice we gave your scouts. Leave our lands and never return, or face the consequences of your crimes." Ragnar's laughter was like the grinding of millstones. "You think your pretty wife's magic can save you? You think calling your little friends changes anything? I am the storm that breaks all shores. I am the darkness that devours light." "You are a relic of a dying age," Thyra replied, raising the Unity blade so it caught the first rays of the sun. "Your ancestors knew only how to take and destroy. Ours learned to build and create. That is why you will fall." The two armies surged toward each other like opposing tides. The clash when they met was deafening, the ring of steel on steel, the thunder of shields striking shields, the shouts and screams of warriors locked in mortal combat. Asgrim found himself fighting beside his wife in the heart of the battle, their movements flowing together as if they had trained for years instead of days. Thyra's Unity blade cut through enemy weapons like they were made of wood, while his own weapons, each carrying the blessing of both clans, seemed to find their targets with supernatural accuracy. Around them, the alliance held firm. Warriors, who had been enemies a week ago, now protected each other's flanks. The Hardborn shields locked with Raven's hollow spears, creating an unbreakable wall that pushed steadily forward through the enemy ranks. And at the center of it all, Ragnar Bloodaxe carved his way toward them like a force of nature, his black axe leaving a trail of death in his wake. "He comes for us," Thyra said, deflecting a spear thrust and cutting down its wielder in one fluid motion. "Let him come," Asgrim replied, raising Bone Crusher to meet the challenge. "This ends here." The two giants crashed together with the force of falling mountains. their weapons ringing against each other in a duel that would determine the fate of the North. But they were no longer fighting alone. The alliance stood with them, and together they were unbreakable. The duel between Asgrim and Ragnar Bloodaxe lasted until the sun stood directly overhead. Two titans locked in combat while the battle raged around them. In the end, it was not strength alone that decided the outcome, but the power of unity over chaos. When Ragnar's black axe shattered against the combined force of Asgrim's inherited weapons and Thyra's mystical blade, the Bloodaxe chieftain fell, with a cry that seemed to echo from the very depths of the underworld. With their leader dead, the enemy forces broke and scattered like leaves before a storm. Some fled to their ships, only to find them burned or captured by the allied fleet. Others threw down their weapons and begged for mercy. The few who tried to continue fighting were quickly overwhelmed by warriors who fought not just for victory, but for the survival of their entire way of life. As the last of the enemy resistance crumbled, Thyra stood beside her husband on the blood-stained beach, the unity blade still gleaming in her hand. Around them, warriors from 17 clans embraced like brothers, their differences forgotten in the face of what they had accomplished together. "It is finished," she said quietly, watching as the prophecy stone, now dim and peaceful, returned to its pouch. "This battle? Yes," Asgrim agreed, looking out at the burned ships and scattered enemy dead. "But what we have built here will last far longer than this day." In the weeks that followed, representatives from all the allied clans gathered in the Great Hall of Ironhold to formalize what had been forged in battle. The marriage between Asgrim and Thyra was recognized not just as a political alliance, but as the foundation of a new confederation that would protect the northern seas for generations to come. Magnus, his hair now completely white, but his eyes still sharp as winter ice, stood before the assembled chieftains with the ancient treaties that would bind them all. "Today we do more than end a war," he announced. "Today we begin a peace that will outlast all of our lives." The wedding crown of two clans, their final artifact, rested on a cushion before the altar. Crafted by the master smiths of all 17 clans, it incorporated treasures and symbols from each: silver from the Iron Hills, amber from the Storm Crows, carved whalebone from the Bear's Lairs, and precious stones from a dozen other traditions. It was not a crown for ruling over others, but a symbol of shared responsibility and mutual protection. When the time came for the ceremony that would formally establish the Confederation, Asgrim and Thyra approached the altar together. The crown was too large for either of them to wear alone. It had been designed to rest across both their shoulders, requiring them to stand side by side to bear its weight. "Do you swear to protect not just your own clans, but all who shelter under this alliance?" asked Father Ragnar, the Gothi who had married them and now stood ready to perform this greater binding. "We swear it," they replied in unison, their voices carrying clearly through the packed hall. "Do you swear to choose cooperation over conquest, building over breaking, unity over division?" "We swear it." "Then let the crown be placed, and let all witness the birth of the Northern Alliance." As the wedding crown settled across their shoulders, Asgrim felt the weight of responsibility and the warmth of shared purpose. Beside him, Thyra smiled with a joy that seemed to light up the entire hall. Around them, warriors who had once been enemies raised their weapons in salute, their voices joining in a cheer that could be heard for miles. The feast that followed lasted 3 days and became legend. Stories were told that would be remembered for generations, of the giant warrior who learned that strength came from partnership, of the hidden seer who chose to step out of the shadows and claim her destiny, and of the alliance that proved unity was stronger than any force of destruction. On the final evening, as the last of the visiting chieftains prepared to return to their homes, Asgrim and Thyra walked together along the cliff tops overlooking the harbor. Below them, the combined fleet of the Alliance rode at anchor, not warships now, but vessels of trade and communication that would keep the clans connected across the vast northern seas. "What do you see when you look into the future now?" Asgrim asked, taking his wife's hand as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Thyra was quiet for a moment, her eyes holding the distant look that meant she was consulting the visions. When she smiled, it was with the contentment of someone who had seen her deepest hopes fulfilled. I see our children playing with the children of former enemies, learning to speak each other's languages and share each other's songs, she said softly. I see ships carrying goods and knowledge instead of weapons and warriors. I see settlements growing into cities, and cities becoming centers of learning and art. She squeezed his hand. I see peace, husband. Not the peace of conquest or submission, but the peace of choice, people deciding to build together instead of tear apart. And us, what do you see for us? I see a love that was born from necessity, growing into something that will be remembered in songs long after we are gone. I see two people who found in each other not just a partner, but a better version of themselves. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they stood together on the cliff, no longer the reluctant bride and suspicious warrior who had met at an altar months ago, but true partners who had forged something new from the ashes of old conflicts. In the harbor below, a ship's bell rang the evening watch, its clear tone carrying across the water like a promise. The age of chaos and blood was ending. The time of the Northern Alliance had begun, and somewhere in the darkness, carried on the wind from distant shores, came the sound of other voices, other peoples who had heard the stories of what unity could accomplish. The alliance would grow, Asgrim knew, as others chose cooperation over conquest and building over breaking. The future was bright with possibility, and they would face it together.